Our next speaker is Haneen AlOtaibi. Haneen is currently enrolled in MA in Islamic Thought and Applied Ethics at CILE. Her thesis is entitled The Role of Habituation in Changing the Individual's Character Traits in Islamic Ethics. She is an alumna of the Teach for Qatar organization and taught science education in Qatari public schools between 2019-2020. She obtained a BA in occupational therapy from the University of Jordan in 2017. Haneen, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you. Thanks for our professors and all the speakers, and especially for Dr. Mu'taz for all his support and guidance. I can't share my PowerPoint if you can help, or I can just start.
Please try it now.
Yeah, we hear you well. Go ahead.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So today my topic will be about the role of habituation in changing the individual character traits in Islamic moral philosophy. In this presentation, I will start by introducing the topic, then I will describe my methodology and the main argument, to finish with some remarks. So the importance of this topic is referred to the importance of the habit concept as an important and complex concept with an interdisciplinary nature. This concept is used in different disciplines with various meanings, ranging from repeated actions or automatic actions to states of character or stable dispositions. One of the most important disciplines that discussed the habit in its relation with character enhancement and character formation is the moral philosophy and especially virtue ethics. However, there are many contemporary studies about the habit and habituation. There are limited contemporary studies regarding the Islamic tradition itself. However, habituation is critical in the Islamic moral education, especially in philosophy, Sufism, and adab. In this presentation is part of my thesis that concerned the habit and habituation concept in Sufism and Islamic moral philosophy. However, I will limit my presentation to the moral philosophy. Basically, I will discuss three key Islamic philosophers during the 4th and the 5th Hijri century, who are Al-Farabi, Miskawi, and Al-Ghazali. I tried to scan their works and selected those with relevance to moral education, focusing on habit and habituation, extracted and compared their discussion regarding these two questions mainly. How did they understand the concept of habit and habituation process? And what is the role of habituation process in changing the individual character traits in their opinion? So starting with their moral education, they based their moral education on a basic principle. They believed that the human is obliged to enhance his character traits and to maintain his virtues because it is the way to do what suits his special potentials, basically reason, his ability to choose, and his ability to change and acquire character traits to accomplish the purpose of a human's life. So their moral education aims to achieve human perfection, as some of them understand this as fulfilling the role of God's vicegerent through acquiring virtues. In their moral education, they perceived habits as a second nature, as they mentioned, al-'adatu khuluqun thanin, and a stable disposition that they called as malaka or hay'a, that leads to perfection of character traits and acquiring virtues. Also, they understand the habituation process as one of their moral education methods that aims to change the character traits or acquiring the virtues in one hand and to maintain these virtues if they are acquired in another hand. So this is through the volitional repetition of an action, but not any action. So the actions that could lead to virtue acquisition should be moderate actions done willingly by choice all the time in all situations and for the inherent value itself. In their understanding of this process, reasoning has an essential role through the whole process. So basically, habituation and their understanding, in order to lead to virtue acquisition, should be like subjective, continuous, and volitional. So to understand their main arguments, I will detail on these key dimensions regarding their moral education in general from two perspectives, their understanding of the possibility of changing character traits and their different approaches to do that. And by focusing on the habituation process itself from two components, their understanding of it as an interaction between the self and the body, and the role of reasoning in this process. Starting with the possibility to change character traits, all of them agreed on the possibility of changing character traits because the opposite will deny the rational power abilities of the human and will make all kinds of teaching and disciplining useless. However, they understand the changing process as not directed to change the human nature itself. Instead, it is directed to modify and cultivate the powers of the self in order to reach moderation by following the rational power reasoning. Accordingly, they understand that people vary in their potential to change. However, all of them can change in certain limits based on two factors. The first is the inherent factor, that is their powers, the more dominant power and the balance between their powers. And the other factor is about their exerted effort in acquiring knowledge and practicing actions and virtues. Their moral education was through different approaches. So they discussed the changing process between the cultivating the self and cultivating the others. So in cultivating the self, where the individual can enhance his own character trait through acquiring knowledge and habituation on certain actions. And on the other level, the individual who cultivated themselves can and should cultivate others, especially like children, through teaching, disciplining, and sometimes enforcing if convincing another approach didn't work. In all their approaches, the centrality of combining knowledge and practice was clear in all the approaches. Going for the habituation process itself, this combination of knowledge and practice was also there in the habituation process on the individual level. This process and their understanding was based on the continuous interaction between the self and the body. So while the character traits of each individual influence his actions, the individual actions which with choice and effort will reinforce these character traits. And they explained that by the analogy between acquiring virtues through habituation and mastering crafts through practicing their related actions. So the role of reasoning is clear throughout the whole process of the habituation process, and I can summarize it in two categories, like before the habituation process and during the habituation process as it is continuous. So before the habituation process, the individual should cultivate his rational power through acquiring knowledge, which should be like to know his self, the path, and the virtues that he wants to acquire and the related actions that will enable him to acquire these virtues. And because acquiring the theoretical virtues is a prerequisite for acquiring any practical virtues. And during the habituation process, to cultivate the other two powers, the irascible and concupiscent power, to be guided by the rational power in all situations, to reach moderation through following the reasoning process. So I will conclude with these key remarks that the Muslim philosophers agreed on the volitional role of each individual in his moral enhancement through the habituation process. However, this habituation process to lead to acquiring virtues should have internal motivation, deliberation, and persistence. And Al-Ghazali and before him Al-Asfahani added one prerequisite for acquiring virtues, which is asking for divine assistance, as they consider it as al-fada'il al-tawfiqiyya, that the human can't acquire any virtue without this virtues. And as we can see that Muslim scholars and philosophers were influenced by the Greek philosophy from these points of view, like their use of powers of the self in their psychology and their understanding of the habituation in Aristotelian way, such as his conception about the moderate actions, and the parallel between body health and the self-health. However, the Islamic worldview was clear in their discussions, especially in the ultimate goal that concerns the hereafter, and in cultivating the rational power in light of revelation and its relation with the forms of knowledge, such as knowing about God, knowing oneself, and the path. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haneen, for your excellent presentation. And we have, I think, much time to discuss these very interesting topics. I open the floor for the participants in the conference. First of all, we have already a couple of questions in the chat. So you can click on the hand, so can I know who has question or contribution or comment?
Doctor? Sorry,
Yes,
it's me, Mariam. Yeah, someone has sent me a question privately, so I don't know if you can see it. So should I just answer it or?
Well, yeah, you can also read the question and
Okay.
then answer it. Go ahead.
Okay. So the question reads as follows: for the three scientists in your research, is justice for them based on inequality or equality? I mean, is justice based on respect for individual differences, unfair justice? Does justice require the precedence of the right over duty, in the sense that the application and practice of justice can only be done by prioritizing the basic rights and gains of individuals over duties? So the answer to this question is that they actually, all three of them accept hierarchy. They do not try to eliminate it. They just try to moderate it. And for Meskaway and Al-Mawardi, they adopt the Aristotelian proportionate justice. In other words, the rights are given based on rank and status. So justice to the ruler is different from justice with someone who's below you. It's not egalitarian justice. And even when it comes to economic rights, it depends on rank and status. So again, it's not egalitarian. For Ibn Taymiyyah, he doesn't talk about rank and status, but he does talk about Muslims and non-Muslims. So he adopts an egalitarian approach when it comes to Muslims, but he does not give the same equality and the same rights to non-Muslims, because he sees them, well, this needs more research, but one of the reasons is that he sees non-Muslims as unjust to themselves. And so, like, in general, like, to summarize Ibn Taymiyyah's stance, his hierarchy is different in the sense that it's hierarchy between Muslims and non-Muslims. For Meskaway and Al-Mawardi, the hierarchy is based on rank and status. So I hope this answers your question, and if you need anything else, just let me know.
Okay, I think there's another question from, I think, Dr. Bashir Tuhami, directed to Dr. Bilal, or which is perhaps the origin of philosophy and religion is the effort to imitate God. Is it possible to formulate a moral theory based on the names of God, such as Friedrich Nietzsche's Superman theory? Will this theory be useful in the face of the epidemic of atheism?
Thank you very much for the question. The thing is that, well, I'm not aware of the Superman theory as is introduced by Friedrich Nietzsche. But the thing I would like to add is that when I was analyzing the literature on Islamic virtue ethics, what I found is that there are four types of literatures that are present in this genre. The first one is, like very few works have been directed where the comparison between Islamic virtue ethics and the Western virtue ethics is done. The main focuses of the literatures on Islamic virtue ethics is on, like engaging a particular type of virtue that is found in Islamic tradition. Like for example, Atif Khalil's article on Rida is an example in that regard. Or you can find, works that is presented by, like virtues as is discussed by Miskawai or Isfahani. And then finally, there is a trend where you can find Islamic virtue, applied Islamic virtue ethics, where, like in the context of bioethics, where few works are done stating that you need to, you shouldn't restrict yourself to the obligations and rules alone, but you need to focus more on Islamic virtues as well. So, my aim with this research was to have a conversation and introduce this Sufi concept to the ongoing modern discussion on virtue ethics. Well, this is just the beginning stage, and I should be doing more, like by engaging with other philosophers as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. Yeah, Dr. Yassin, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the three presenters. I enjoyed your papers. My first question is for Bilal. I'm very curious about McIntyre, and you pointed out some shortcomings, but I think because of lack of time, you couldn't elaborate on what are the shortcomings in McIntyre where you feel doesn't quite fit in for the Islamic tradition or the Sufi tradition. And then for Maryam, I think Maryam, did you talk on Miskaway, or Maryam's paper was on justice, am I right? Yeah. So for Maryam, you mentioned about justice to others. There's justice to God, justice to the self, justice to others. Now, justice to others, this is where the laws come into place. And Aristotle identifies two dimensions of the laws of justice, which is the rectificatory justice and the distributive justice, right? To what extent these forms of justice, in my view, I think that it's directly inspired by Aristotle, and Miskaway just integrated it into his ethical philosophy. And then for the third presenter, Haneen, on habituation, there again, the influence of Aristotle seems quite strong there. The question of ada and habituation, because that's very central to Aristotle's ethics, that virtue is a result of habituation, which is, sources from outside, whereas, the Islamic idea, we also have the idea of fitra, that we also have an inner, we have the potential for virtue, because fitra is a pure internal state, and we incline towards God and so on. So to what extent is the Islamic philosophers you're referring to, how do they differ from Aristotle in the question of habituation, or have they just taken it as it is?
Thank you, Dr. Yassin. I think we can begin like in the order, Bilal. And,
Thank you very much, Professor Yasin, for your question. Due to the shortage of time, I had to summarize very much while presenting, and like I have tried to explain in detail in my thesis how the areas where you know, like where Muslims cannot accommodate and function within the theory of McIntyre or McIntyre's understanding of virtue ethics. So what I find, you know, like to summarize it very shortly, what I found is that in the theory of virtue ethics as is proposed by McIntyre, as a Muslim, one find it very difficult to accommodate the extreme position he maintained against deontology by creating a very strict distinction between virtue and rules. So he was not he had, you know, like strong thesis of virtue ethics, which I have mentioned in my presentation, and also the absence of centrality of God and the hereafter the in his worldview uh, is missing as well. So it is difficult for a Muslim to function with this background and with this worldview while engaging with McIntyre's theory of virtue ethics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, Ms. Kawai, oh, sorry, should I?
Yeah, Mariam, yeah, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Ms. Kawai puts a lot of emphasis on laws and education, and with regards to distributive justice, he does say that people who belong to the same rank should get the same rights, including economic rights. And he does say that corrective justice is, he does highlight corrective justice, that any aggression happens has to be annulled by inflicting the same aggression on the aggressor. But he does call it shara. He doesn't call it, like, he tries to, like, you see, because I was comparing Aristotle's texts with Ms. Kawai's text, so I would see the same thing written, but kind of Islamicized, like he would just say, instead of law, he would say shara. So he was putting emphasis on laws, and he said that they are important in order to implement justice.
By the way, the interesting thing about Mishkaway is he actually quotes Aristotle.
Yes, and he misquotes
He will
him.
say justice to the self, justice to others, and justice to God.
Yes.
But when you go back to Aristotle,
yes,
you'll find that's not the exact quotation. Mishkaway
yes,
doesn't quote exactly from Aristotle. So
yes,
the question is that idea of justice to God. I mean, they believed in gods, right? In
yeah.
gods. Now,
Actually,
that idea comes from somewhere else, from some Neoplatonic commentary.
yes, and actually, when it comes to justice towards God, he uses Aristotle's analogy of the ruler and the people. That's how he tries to reconcile the Aristotelian ideas with the Islamic ideas, and he also misquotes Aristotle. He was saying that Aristotle says that the imama purifies man, and of course we all know the caliphate, I'm sorry, and of course we all know that the caliphate and the imama did not exist at Aristotle's times. So
Yes.
there are some opinions that he was actually selective when he was quoting and misquoting others, and he was not really concerned with citing with citing the right sources, or he was more concerned of just basically corroborating his ideas and saying what he wants to say.
I don't think he was deliberately misquoting. He was probably using another source.
Yeah, this is also a possibility. Yeah.
Because they didn't know Greek.
Yes.
They didn't know Greek. Hunayd ibn Ishaq translated Aristotle into Arabic.
Yes.
So they looked at the Arabic source and not the Greek source.
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Haneen, I think it's your turn.
Thank you.
First, thanks a lot, Dr. Yassin Muhammad, for the question and for the book of The Path to Virtue. It's really
Oh.
informative and really useful. And for the question, I believe that maybe we can differentiate between the three of them. Like Al-Farabi was really inclined to copy Aristotle more than Miskawayh and Al-Ghazali. As we can see, Miskawayh tried to integrate Al-Sharia with the philosophy and to integrate adab al-Sharia with the disciplining of children especially. And that these disciplines can be known from al-Sharia. However, I can find like the basic differentiation is clear more in Al-Ghazali's understanding of habituation, where he understands that virtues can be both like natural and بفضل ilahi or as a God gift, or it can be acquired through habituation. And another thing, like all of them like talked about al-Kamal, but Miskawayh and Al-Ghazali consider this perfection of a human as God's vicegerent. And I think this is the differentiation between them and Aristotle, where the God vicegerent should worship God and to reach this position. So they like integrate al-ibadat in the habituation process, and they put the prerequisite of al-fada'il al-tawfiqiyya and God assistance in their understanding of the whole habituation process. So the reason itself or the moderate action can be known and can be in the light of revelation and in light of Sharia.
Thank you.
There are two
Further.
further questions directed to Haneen. So from Bashir to Hami, can a practical approach to changing habits be extracted from the writings of the three scholars in your research, especially since the issue of changing habits is a global problem now?
I believe that it would need like a further research, but from what I looked for, like I can say that maybe because they talked about like some motives for this process and some burdens, and it's like between the teaching and the disciplining aspects. So I think they have a rich discussions, and maybe the Sufi the Sufi tradition can be like helpful in this practical discussions, because they based their writings on their practice. So they have they practiced the habituation process in a practical way that can help in understanding the habituation process in this practical approach, or to extract from it a practical approach that suits our period of time.
The second question, thank you for your beautiful presentation. Since you highlighted the role of reason, I wonder what is the role of moral intuition in habituation? I'm afraid of over-rationalization of moral act, which may lead to self-righteousness and arrogance. So I wonder, what did the scholar say about moral intuition of the heart, which may balance with the reason in the head?
If I understand well, is it like the moral intuition, it is about fitra or dhamir or?
I don't know, but maybe Isnan can speak up.
But for the other part of the question about the like putting the reason or rational power in its place, they try to combine between the revelation and reason. So reason can't go beyond the revelation in some of their understanding, like Al-Asfahani and Al-Ghazali. So it should be limited to the revelation. And in the Sufi tradition, they understand the reason as the function of the heart itself. So, and Al-Ghazali like compared between the rational power in the philosophical, ethical discussions and the heart in the Sufi discussions, and because they shared in this reasoning process. But I believe that they limited this rational power with the like the revelation to guide it and to give it this power of knowing the right of and wrong, and maybe from a different perspective, like even Al-Farabi, and when they discussed the moderate actions of or the moderate action, they discuss it as a really hard to know and hard to reach, because it is the like the center point of a circle that each part of it can lead to a vice. So I feel that it's really hard for the reason to know this moderate actions that would lead to the virtue, and it needs like a self reflection, and in like Al-Ghazali and the Sufi got assistance to reach.
Yeah, thank you, Haneen. Any other questions, comments? I have one comment from Bashir Tuhami. He said, I have a suggestion for those in charge of these beautiful scientific initiatives, which is to organize a forum on how to change habits for the better within a practical ethical perspective. So I think this is for Dr. Khatib to consider. So in the meantime, I have a couple of comments. I will start with Bilal, maybe, because there's a kind of common themes between my paper and his thesis. I think it's very brave to make this comparison between like modern, actually very recent philosopher and like a classical philosopher of Islam, Al-Ghazali. But apart, I don't want to go into details, but my question has to do with this. I mean, to which extent can we buy in this paradigm of التخلق بأخلاق الله? Because when we go into details, I mean, from the outset, it's very promising paradigm, interesting. But when we go into details, there are a lot of how to say, limitations discussed by Al-Ghazali, by many other scholars for this paradigm. So because, and it was discussed earlier by early Mu'tazili scholars like Al-Qadi Abd al-Jabbar in his volume about Al-Shar'iyat. I think he discusses how our deeds are different from the divine deeds. Along the same line, like some scholars said, one of the attributes of God is Al-Jabbar, Al-Mutakabbir. So how can we relate to such virtue if we want to consider this a virtue, right? So there are many limitations put by Al-Ghazali and others for this paradigm. And there are many, I mean, it's a matter of interpretation, how to understand this, right? So isn't it better to think about like human exemplar as more relevant to us humans, as more like enlightening, guiding principles than the divine attributes? Because we are, I mean, the space between humans and divine is too big to how to say, to cross. So this is just one question. Why don't we concentrate on human exemplars and virtues that belongs to tradition? I mean here, like along the lines that you are defending, like the Islamic tradition, there are many like virtues which cannot apply to God, but which is like important, right? So, for example, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi said we have al-lin. Al-lin is like a very important virtue, which we cannot attribute to God because, yeah, it doesn't fit him, but it does fit us. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think about this? This is like, I hope that Sophia will be with us today, but I think she's busy. But what do you think about this?
I would like to start responding by the comment by the response which you gave yesterday, stating that even like Al-Ghazali, along with others, like most prominently Ibn al-Arabi, said that like we need to assume all the divine attributes, not just like Jamal attributes, but even the Jalal attributes. Along all the attributes, and then like but with the human ability or with the human capacity. And then he says, like Ghazali says, the similarity lies only in the name. Like for example, if Allah is like Latif, for example, like you can't be in the perfect sense Latif. For example, like when Prophet said, "Afala kunu abdan shakura," the term shakur itself, like it's a divine name as well. So it's in the human ability and in the human capacity. Now, the issue which you raised, like how can we emulate divine attribute that is associated with Jalal? Ibn Arabi offers, very interesting remarks, and he tries to come out of this dilemma by considering the beneficiaries who are on the receiving end. So he says that all the divine traits can be assumed, but the manifestation should not be made equally to everyone. And then he goes on saying, like uh, one can assume divine names that connote majesty and incomparability only in relation with what is besides Allah, with condition. And then he says the divine character trait Al-Jabbar can be assumed not with reference to Allah, but in fact with references to enemies and evil forces present both internally and externally. So there are ways, like how Al-Ghazali and Ibn al-Arabi tries to say that, and he also mentions this, and this I find it very interesting, is that Allah would not say something to us and would do himself the same thing. And he uses this as one of his foundation to says that to like express the concept at takhalluq bi akhlaqillah. Now why can't we stick on to just the human exemplars instead of godly exemplars? um I think like even like when Ghazali or Ibn Arabi was trying to express this concept of a takhalluq bi akhlaqillah, uh, they were trying. At the end of the day, even Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the best man or the best model who has expressed the concept of takhalluq bi akhlaqillah. So uh, I would ask, why wouldn't God, like why would we stop with the human exemplar? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bilal. Any other questions, comments? I have another comment on Haneen's presentation about the role of habit or habituation and vices, not virtues. I mean, there's a danger. I mean, putting too much maybe emphasis on habit and habituation, right? Because yeah, it's good when it deals with like good character or good virtues and stuff. But what about when it has to do with vices, right? And also when like good characters become a kind of habit, to which extent does this habit might kind lead us to something wrong, right? So for example, if I've been raised up as like somebody who's like very kind, very nice, and this became a habit, right? Like for me, and when I face a situation where like courage and how to say strong attitude is needed, I cannot react in this direction, right? So have you read anything about this? I mean, how scholars discuss this issue? I mean, the danger of habit in some situations, at least.
What I understand about the habits regarding vices and virtues, like Sufis talked a lot about al-fitam min al-adat, But
Okay.
I believe that there is like maybe a problematic issue between the habit and the character trait, العادة والخلق. So sometimes they describe العادة to be referred to actions, while they sometimes refer it as a malaka or hay'a that refers to something as a set disposition in the self itself that emanate some actions. So what I understand, because of that, they ensure about the role of reasoning through the whole process, as it is a continuous process. So reaching a point of having this hay'a or malaka do not mean that this is will still forever or will stay forever, like as it is powerful, and it will rely on the interaction between the body and the self. So like for example, if you are practicing specific actions that are leading to generosity, and suddenly you stopped doing these actions, maybe generosity will be like to its opposite. So habituation can work in the first to acquire this virtue, and after that to maintain this virtue. But however, reasoning should be there in all the situations to know what is the wrong action, the right and the wrong action in this situation. So there's like they said that the forms of actions that lead to certain virtues cannot be limited or cannot be like 1, 2, 3. It is much wider. Just to it's like a rational way to evaluate the situation and the suitable actions that would lead to this virtue, or to keep the human in line with this virtue.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Please.
I mean, even between the...
Please.
Yes.
Please, مقتدى ارفع.
Yeah, please go ahead. I cannot see your... yeah, please تفضل أستاذ مقتدى.
شكرا على هذه العروض الخيرية. فقط أريد أن أعلق عن الغزالي، بخصوص الغزالي. ما هو مقبول الآن منذ القديم أن الغزالي متعد، وأنه ورث كثير من الأمور من الفلسفة ومن غير الفلسفة، وعدل الكثير، أي ورث الكثير عن ابن سينا. وأظن هنا ابن رشد الذي انتقد الغزالي كثيرا، ولكن يعطينا خيطا أو علامة كيف نقرأ، يمكن أن نقرأ الغزالي في كثرته في تعدده. وقال أن ربما الغزالي لم يقصد في المذاهب، في الأمور النظرية، في الأمور العملية، أن نلتزم بمذهب بعينه، وأراد الكلمة التي يستعملها ابن رشد الغزالي يستعملها للعلاقة بين الشريعة والفلسفة، وهي الجمع التي تعني أي أن كيف نوفق بين هذا وهذا، ليس متناقضين، ولكن هناك تأويل يوفق بين الاثنين. ربما بعد كل هذا بالإمكان أن نقرأ الغزالي في 3 مستويات. أي بالنسبة إلى الأمور النظرية يبقى الغزالي أن المعيار للحقيقة هو المنطق، الاحتكام إلى المنطق، أمور نظرية، وبما أن ما هو الذي عمم المنطق بالنسبة للعلوم الإسلامية. بالنسبة للأمور العملية الغزالي ينحو نحو يطلب من ترك المذاهب، ترك تعدد الفضائل، ترك أمام هذه الحيرة يقول العبارة الشهيرة استفتي ضميرك، أي conscience يبقى الضمير هو المقتضى الأول الذي يملي السلوك الفاضل. أظن من هنا يمكن أن نجمع شيئا، أو أن نحاول نقرأ الغزالي قراءة معقولة، يعني ليس في تضاربه، ليس في تشتته أو في كثرته ما يعاب عليه من كثير. يمكن أن نرى هنا معيارين. في الأحياء علوم الدين يضيف أمرا ثالثا، وهو الاقتضاء، البعد الجمالي في الأمر. أي حياتنا بالنسبة إلى الغزالي، الأمور النظرية التي نحتكم إليها فيها إلى العقل، الأمور العملية يبقى الضمير كآخر أمر نحتكم إليه. وأساسا هذا ما أردت أن أضيفه بالنسبة للغزالي، إن أردنا أن نقرأه قراءة غير مشتتة أو غير متناقضة أو متضاربة، فقط مقترح أو منظار أن ننظر إلى الغزالي. وهو ليس بجديد، لأن الرشد يقول لعل الرجل قصد خيرا، وأنه أراد أن يعمم الحكمة من التذبذب بين المذاهب، أراد أن يعمم الحكمة وأن يعطي المذاهب طابعا نسبيا سواء في الأمور النظرية أو في الأمور العملية. شكرا. ما أود أن أخذ رأيكم في هذا. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا أستاذ مقداد. السؤال، التعليق مفتوح للجميع، يعني لمن يريد أن يعلق على ما قاله الأستاذ. لا أعرف، بلال، أظنك فهمت المضمون الأساسي لما قاله الأستاذ مقداد، صحيح؟
I do not have any comment to make with regards to what
نعم. أنا من وجهة نظري أنا أتفق مع الأستاذ مقداد بأن على الرغم من أن يعني الغزالي هو من كتب تهافت الفلاسفة، وأظن أن العدد من الدارسين المعاصرين كتبوا عن هذا الموضوع. فرانك جريفل واحد من بينهم. وهو قضية أن التصور الذي شاع ربما منذ 50 سنة أن الغزالي هو الذي يعني قضى على الفلسفة بتهافت الفلاسفة، و يعني أثر على الاتجاه السني في نبذ الفلسفة، أن هذا غير صحيح، وأنه بالعكس هو الشخص الذي يعني قدم الفلسفة بطريقة مختلفة تماما، قربها يعني أدخلها من الباب الخلفي إذا صح التعبير في الإطار السني، وأصبحت متبنات يعني في الفلسفة الإسلامية. حتى فكرة نفسها، فكرة التخلق بأخلاق الله، هي فكرة سينوية، يعني ابن سينا يلح عليها كثيرا، وإخوان الصفا يلحون عليها كثيرا. أصبحت بعد ذلك فكرة شائعة. حتى ابن تيمية نفسه يعني قبلها بشكل أو بآخر، لم يقبل كلمة التخلق، لكن اختار كلمة التعبد، يعني إذا أردنا أن نربط أيضا مع ما قاله بلال. فأنا أتفق من وجهة نظري، أنا أتفق مع ما قاله الأستاذ مقداد تماما. الأستاذ ياسين عنده تعليق، تفضل.
Yes, just to respond to that question, that Imam al-Ghazali, actually we must read al-Ghazali according to the audience. In every work that he writes, he has a different readership. So, for example, the Mi'ar al-Ilm is a work on logic, and he's addressing the intellect. And then he writes a work called the Mizan al-Amal, while he was still in Baghdad. I would imagine Mizan al-Amal was written probably in 1095, the year when he departed from Baghdad. But in that work, he was sort of between tasawwuf and philosophy, so to speak. And in that work, he critiques the Sufis, actually, for pursuing the tariqah and not achieving their goal of ma'rifah after 10 years or 20 years, simply because they are not rooted in logic, mantiq. They have not based themselves on the intellectual Islamic sciences, he says. Right? Yeah. So this idea that Al-Ghazali was against philosophy, it's not correct. And then in his final work, Ayu al-Walad, Ayu al-Walad, when he was with his disciples in Khurasan, or was it Tus? Right? They asked him, how can we prepare for the year after? You must look at the question. What is the question? The answer is according to the question.
Yes.
The question is, how do we prepare for the year after? And who's asking the question? It's these elderly disciples who are masters in fiqh and usul and falsafa and kalam. And in their later years, he said to them, abandon the sciences. Forget about all this intellectualism. You prepare your soul for the year after. So it's two different responses depending on the audience that is addressing. So people must understand Al-Ghazali because they take him out of context, and they take him just literally according to the Zahir statement that he makes. I think Ustad Muqdad, you might agree with me.
Thank you. Yes, of course.
I just want to add that Frank Dreffel has recently, I mean, a couple of months ago, published a new book called The Formation of Post-Classical Philosophy in Islam, where he repeat his older conclusions about Al-Ghazali as an important philosopher, somebody who promoted philosophy. And his book called تهافت الفلاسفة وليس تهافت الفلسفة. So, and Al-Ghazali also, Ibn Rushd offered a kind of different reading from that of Al-Ghazali.
No.
But he didn't accuse Al-Ghazali of being like non-philosopher or something, or an enemy of philosophers, of philosophy, sorry.
ربما الملاحظة أخيرة، ربما عن طريق الأفلاطون والأفلاطونية المحدثة، أي عن طريق ابن سينا، يمكن أن نقول مع كثير من الحذر أن الغزالي بلاتونايز، أي أضفى صبغة أفلاطونية على الإسلام، على الفكر الإسلامي. هناك تمسك الغزالي بمستوى المعاني، أي بمستوى المعاني، بمعنى لا تبتعد كثيرا عن الفكر الأفلاطوني. المعنى هو مصطلح معقد بالطبع، لكن هناك يمكن أن نبدأ قبول هذه الفكرة، كيف أضفى هذه الصبغة الأفلاطونية من خلال ابن سينا، بالطبع من خلال الأفلاطونية المحدث ومن خلال ابن سينا بالأساس، هذه الصبغة الأفلاطونية، سواء في إحياء علوم الدين أو في الرسالة الأخرى التي ينتقدها فيها كثيرا ابن تيمية، في الرسالة الشهيرة التي ينتقدها ابن تيمية، التي يستعيد فيها الغزالي على طريقة صوفية كل تعاليم ابن سينا في نهاية الأمر. أي بعبارة أخرى أن ابن سينا هو الذي فتح الطريق أمام فلسفة التصوف، أي إلقاء صبغة صوفية على التصوف، فلسفية على التصوف. ربما هناك بعد أفلاطوني على مستوى المعاني، سواء خاصة في إحياء علوم الدين. صبغة فقط أفلاطوني، لا يعني أنه، ولكن هذا جانب مهم عند الغزالي أو في قراءة الغزالي. شكرا.
نعم، شكرا جزيلا أستاذ مقداد. إذا كان هناك أي أسئلة أو تعليقات أخرى قبل أن أعطي الكلمة للأستاذ معتز، ربما يريد أن يختم هذه الجلسة والمؤتمر، لا أدري. أنا بالنسبة لي لا أرى، لا يظهر لدي أي تعليق أو سؤال جديد. من جهتي أشكر المشاركين الثلاثة. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you in this session. Now I give the word to Dr. Mu'taz Al-Khatib, maybe to conclude this session and the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, floor is yours.
دكتور سامر، فقط كلمة قصيرة تفاعلا مع ما قاله الدكتور مقتاد بخصوص الغزالي. أعتقد في دراسة لي حديثة ستنشر قريبا حول consult your heart, the self as a source of moral judgment. في خصصت قسما خاصا عن الغزالي أبين فيه كيف أنه أكد فكرة المسؤولية الفردية وأحال إلى ما سماه القلب المفتي.
نعم.
لاحظ هذه الموازنة بين القلب المفتي والمفتي والفقيه المفتي. فهو يقيم هذه الموازنة بين القلب المفتي والمفتي للتأكيد على فكرة المسؤولية الفردية. يعني هي دراسة مطولة، الغزالي أخذ جزءا منها فقط. النقطة الثانية، أعتقد أننا حينما نتحدث عن الإمام الغزالي وموقفه من الفلسفة، يبدو أن الإشكال في تلقيه من قبل الفقهاء اللاحقين. يعني فقهاء الشافعية مثلا بعد الغزالي حرموا الفلسفة في المتون الفقهية. لا أعرف أحدا قبل، يعني لا أعرف إذا في نصوص مبكرة، الآن لا أتذكر أن هنالك نصوصا مبكرة سابقة على الغزالي تحرم الفلسفة. ولكن بعد الغزالي هنالك نصوص في متون المذهب الشافعي تحرم قراءة كتب الفلسفة من ابن الصلاح وما بعد. يعني طبعا يبدو أن تلقي الغزالي، المشكلة كانت في تلقي الغزالي. يعني نحن أمام فريقين ممن تلقوا الغزالي. فريق انتقدوه بشدة، خاصة في المغرب العقلاني.
لا
انتقدوا الغزالي في المغرب، مثل المازري مثلا الذي أساء إليه إساءة بالغة للغزالي، يتحدث عنه بخصوص، وهو معاصر له. وابن رشد بالمناسبة تتلمذ على طلب الإجازة من المازري كتابة. يعني طلب منه الإجازة وهو ضد الفلسفة. المازري ضد الفلسفة تماما. يعني يعيب على الجويني والغزالي أنهما قرأا الفلسفة والأفكار الضالة التي عندهم أتتهم من الفلسفة. وكان إماما كبيرا للمالكية في زمنه، فبالتالي أن الموقف ضد الفلسفة كان قويا جدا في زمن الغزالي وقبله أيضا. ولكن ولذلك ربما هذا ما يفسر المحاولة الملتوية التي فعلها الغزالي لتوطين الفلسفة، الفكر الفلسفي داخل الفكر الإسلامي. هذه ملاحظة سريعة. دكتور كريمة, would you like to say a few words?
العفو في هذه النقطة بالذات، للدكتور معتز، مع شيء من المبالغة الكاريكاتير. لعل الغزالي أطاح بعلم الكلام أكثر مما أطاح بالفلسفة، والأشعري منهم بصفة خاصة للمزح أو للدعابة.
لا، ما يؤكد هذه الدعابة. سأعطيك معلومة تؤكد هذه الدعابة، فيها شيء من الصحة، وهو أن المازري خصمه الذي لا يعرفه ولم يلتقي به لما تكلم عن الغزالي ودوره في الكلام وعن الغزالي عامة، قال إنه لم يستبحر في علم الكلام. يعني هو يقلل من شأنه في علم الكلام. فرد عليه السبكي، ابن السبكي تاج الدين فيما بعد، مدافعا عن الأشاعرة طبعا، وقال إن الذي نقمه المازري على الجويني وعلى الغزالي، الجويني أستاذ الغزالي طبعا، أنهما أمران: أن المغاربة يتعصبون للمالكية، والجويني والغزالي انتقدا مالك. والأمر الثاني أن المغاربة يستعظمون الخروج على مذهب أبي الحسن الأشعري.
نعم.
والجويني والغزالي خالفا أبا الحسن الأشعري في مسائل.
نعم كثير. نعم.
هذا يؤكد الدعابة. Professor Kramer?
Thank you. I greatly enjoyed following your lively debate. I'm not sure that there are all that many sites no matter where people learn it in this particular tradition in all its variety, actually engage in that kind of open discussion. But they say, I disagree. You may have a valid point, but I don't share it. So this is extremely refreshing. I'm not, as you possibly know, a specialist in the fields which were discussed right at the end, but I greatly enjoyed following the debate, the presentations. Among the points made, I was particularly interested, but that is my personal interest, of course, in comments to the extent that some of the participants observe a shift from a focus on character and virtues as the main interest of pre-modern thinkers to a greater focus on acts and acting, al-amal, among modern participants in the various debates. I think that is extremely interesting. I'm persuaded by the argument, but it would be worth exploring even further. Second, as I said yesterday, I was again impressed by the discussions on takhalluq, akhlaq, or af'al Allah, with the slightly differing points of view brought forth from various participants. I tend to side with Sami Rashwan, who emphasized the reluctance of major thinkers in the past, and I would say in the present, to actually call for an imitation of God. Of course, we know about important trends within the Sufi tradition, but I would be interested in a further elucidation of the strength and weaknesses, or let's say the support for and opposition to or critique of this particular approach. Of course, this is only just one, or these are two strands of the debate, but it shows clearly that even though our valid host, Dr. Mu'taz, is now slightly exhausted, as we can see, it was a wonderful meeting. The fact that he's exhausted, perhaps not as the only one, shows that it has been vivid, engaging. As an aside, I was smiling because I saw several entries in the chat that were marked as private, but we all could see them. But at least they said something extremely positive. And I would really like to join those colleagues who have thanked the organizers in general, and Dr. Mu'taz in particular, and of course all the contributors to the conference for their valid, important contributions. And I take it that conference number 9 is not necessarily the last. 9 is no particularly hallowed number in either the Islamic or other traditions. So if there is a continuation, I look forward to it. I was greatly pleased to be able, together with Professor Kravitz, to participate in preparing some of the thoughts that went into the conference, and I wish everybody success and reward for her and his efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kramer, and it would be our pleasure to collaborate in the future, inshallah, in future works and projects. I would like to thank Professor Brigitte, also Kravitz here. Unfortunately, she is not present with us. She is with us, but it's not. She's not directly. And I would like to thank also all the participants for their valuable contribution. And I would like to thank also the moderators, the attendees, and my colleagues here in CILE. Thanks everybody, and we hope that we will meet in our future events also. Physically, maybe. We hope.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.